Hi, I'm Peter J. Ray. Welcome. Today's topic is the 1977 Cleveland Indians MLB season. Again, the Indians were playing at Cleveland Municipal Stadium, that beloved ballpark on Lake Erie, and where First Energy Stadium now stands. It was a dual-purpose park. The Browns played football there as well, and in September Indians games or September Browns games, the one side of the field would have the infield dirt from the Indians games, and the center field bleachers for an Indians games became the dog pound for the Browns in the late 80s. Well, the Tribe had a tough year in 1977. They finished 71-90. Tough year. 19 games under 500. Fifth place, 28 and a half games out of first. So it was a very tough year. Very disappointing because, the previous year we were 3 games above 500. One of the coaches was Rocky Colavito, who was the beloved player from the late 50s. He used to say, "Don't knock the rock." So he was again coaching for Cleveland. Another coach was Harvey Haddix. I believe he was the pitching coach. He actually had the distinction of as a player in the 50s for the Milwaukee Braves, throwing 12 perfect innings in a game and then losing the game because his team did not score, and eventually they scored off Haddix. Frank Robinson was the manager to start the season, but he got fired after about 60 games, after 57 games. Their team's record was 26-31. So Robinson lasted less than 2.5 years as manager. And then he went on to actually have a long managing career. He managed, I believe, for Baltimore, San Francisco Giants, and the Washington Nationals. I believe into his 70s. He was, he was an old guy. So anyway, he made history in Cleveland, the first African-American manager in baseball. He was replaced by one of his coaches, Jeff Torborg, who actually did worse. His record, he was 45-59, so 15 games under. Early on, Torborg seemed like he was doing well. He was, I think they had a 7-game winning streak after he got hired. I remember one of my classmates growing up, they called him Jeff Tuborg after the beer. There was Tuborg beer during that time. So Torborg also managed for other teams. So anyway, it was a very tough year. In left field, the Indians had Bruce Bachty in left field. He hit .304 and 5 home runs, 43 RBIs. We picked him up in the Dave LaRoche trade with the Angels, and which was that was a interesting deal. In center field, Rick Manning had a very tough year. He had .226. He only played 68 games. Manning got hurt. Rick Manning was a guy who really prided himself on his play in center field. He could really fly. And he loved to electrify the crowd, making diving catches and going up against the outfield wall and trying to catch a would-be home runs. But and this tended to lead to injuries. So Manning was hurt. Manning got hurt, and his hitting was way off. Oftentimes the guys are playing hurt. I think he had a sore back, so he had a very tough year. In right field, the Indians had Jim Norris, who I really liked. He was a stocky guy. He hit .270 and led the team with 26 stolen bases. I liked Jim Norris. He was a good guy, good hitter, good player. Played real hard, really hustled. Good guy. Again, at third base, we had Buddy Bell, whose batting average was .292. Good hitter. 11 home runs, 64 RBIs. And you could tell Bell was getting better. His hitting was getting better. And unfortunately, he continued to improve. And unfortunately, we traded him, I believe, after this year, and so he had actually better years for other teams, including Texas Rangers and Cincinnati Reds. At shortstop, Frank Duffy was our shortstop. He hit .201, so not too good. His hitting was way off, but he was a tremendous fielder, Frank Duffy, and that's why he was there. That was during that era. I know Baltimore Orioles had Mark Belanger at short, who never hit more than .220, but you need a guy. You really need a good defensive shortstop to take hits away from other teams, to make the long throw from deep in the hole. And so anyway, Duffy was a tremendous fielder. Dwayne Kuiper was at second. hit 277, and he hit the only home run of his career that year. So that was he had 50 RBIs again. Kuiper was a tremendous fielder, and he was a good hitter as well. At first base, we had Andre Thornton, his first year in Cleveland. He had 263, 28 home runs, and 70 RBIs. You know, we tend to criticize the front office for all the bad trades they made. Guys like Phil Segui and Gabe Paul, who were the GMs during these years. But this was one of the best trades the Indians ever made, because we picked him up from Montreal for Jackie Brown, who was a mediocre starting pitcher. And Thornton actually, for a time, had the Indians' all-time home run record. You know, more 200 some, 250 around that area. He was a good guy, Andre Thornton, and he had a very tragic thing happen after one season. I think after he's playing for Cleveland, he was in a car accident, and his wife and very young daughter died, and then they had this young son who survived. But he overcame that horrific tragedy. You know, became a very strong Christian. He was a good guy, and he had a tremendous career for Cleveland. Our catcher that year was Fred KENDALL. He hit 249, 3 home runs, 39 RBIs. He was a good player. You know, not a tremendous hitter, but I believe a good catcher, and that's what you really need. Our designated hitter again was Rico Carty, who hit 280, 15 home runs, 80 RBIs. Rico Carty could hit. Tremendous hitter from the Dominican Republic. Had a real personality. He had several names when they would introduce him, and he had trouble, running. His knees were no good, but, everybody loved Rico Carty. He was a very, charismatic, happy, funny guy. Some of the bench players we had included Larvell Blanks, who hit 286, 6 home runs, 38 RBIs. Larvell, actually, I met Andre Thornton at our church. Yeah, it was pretty fun. Talked to him for a little bit, and I asked him about Larvell. What do you think about Larvell Blanks? And he said, I have a lot of faith in Larvell. Larvell Blanks was a shortstop, and he could hit, but his fielding was a little erratic. He tended to kind of have a wild arm, throw the ball away sometimes. Another guy, bench player who actually played a lot, was Paul Dade, who hit 291, and he was a free agent. This was the first year of the free agency. Actually, it started with Catfish 175, and then Dave McNally and Andy Messersmith challenged the reserve clause, which meant players could be signed indefinitely by teams, and they could never leave. And anyway, 77 was the floodgates open. Free agency really began in earnest, and we picked up Paul Dade. He had a good year, 16 stolen bases, good hitter, Paul Dade. Another bench player, Ray Fosse, hit 265, 6 home runs, 27 RBIs, and we traded him in September to the Mariners. So Ray Fosse, a beloved player, tremendous player. He was a star, 1970, and good guy. Another fellow from the bench, Alfredo Griffin, hit 146 in 14 games. I think most of the year he was in the minor leagues. He was this tremendous shortstop prospect for the future. Johnny Grubb hit 301, and only 34 games. We picked him up in the George Hendrick trade with the Padres, which was a bad trade. But 301, that's a good average Grubb had, and good guy, Johnny Grubb. John Lowenstein hit 242 in 81 games. I believe this was the third time that he hit 242. It's kind of funny that he had that same average three out of 4 years. Bill Melton, another guy, hit 241 in 50 games. Melton actually had been a star for the Chicago White Sox. Longtime third baseman, and then this was near the end of his career. I was pretty excited when we picked up Bill Melton, because he'd been the star player. Ron Pruitt hit 288 in 78 games. He was a catcher. You need more than one catcher because catching is such a tough job. The guys really wear out. And Pruitt could hit. That was a good average. Charlie Spikes, my hero. Hit 232 in only 32 games. Had only 3 home runs, and I believe this was the end of the line for Charlie. He had 11 RBIs, and yeah, I felt bad. This is how it is when you have a favorite player and he struggles or gets traded. As I mentioned, this was the beginning of free agency, and the big free agent Cleveland signed was Wayne Garland, whom the year before for Baltimore had a record of 20-7, and so that was really good. And then we signed him for a total of $2.3 million over 10 years, that was big money back then. This was the beginning of the escalation of salaries, and then it meant that the players, making. Of course, nowadays, just remember, Alex Rodriguez was paid a total of $250 million or $25 million a year. So now this contract, would be very, very minimal. Still, would be a lot for the average worker and average American. So we picked up Wayne Garland. He went 13-19. He led the American League in losses. He threw 21 complete games, ERA of 3.6. The thing is, he had a shoulder injury, rotator cuff, and again back then the medical care wasn't good, and he felt this pressure to he had all this big contract, he's making all this money, and he thought, man, I got to play, and he pitched when he should not have, and it ruined his career. It was really tragic. Then because this was one of the drawbacks of free agency. These guys, probably playing when they shouldn't have, and it's funny how baseball changed, and really this is when the big money came, and then up till now, the salaries have gone up and up and up, and now we have cable TV bills we pay, and of course the tickets are so expensive now, in large part due to these high salaries. Anyway, he was our first pitcher in the rotation. Dennis Eckersley was 14-13 with a 3.53 ERA, another good year. He was developing, young pitcher. And he went on to have a tremendous career, although we ended up trading him, I believe, after this year. On May 30th, he threw a no-hitter at the stadium, and I was there. I really was. We won 1-0. I was with my friend Keith Euchre, who doesn't remember it because of drinking. But anyway, my memory, it's funny, memory is faulty. My memory is the last batter was Willie Mays Aikens. And I think it was a called third strike, maybe a swinging strike, but I think that isn't true. According to what I've read in history books or in the records, he was not the last hitter. Anyway, that was very exciting seeing Dennis Eckersley, seeing that no-hitter. And, we've only had one no-hitter since then. 4 years later, Len Barker threw a perfect game. And Cleveland hasn't had a no-hitter since then. So this Carlos Carrasco seems to get close. Jim Bibby was 12-13, 3.57 ERA. He was continuing to develop as a young pitcher. His ERA was okay, and it takes a lot of skill to succeed as a pitcher. Rick Waits was 9-7 with a 3.99 ERA, and he was also that was a good year. Rick Waits, he actually pitched quite a few years for us. Good solid pitcher. Al Fitzmorris was 6-10 with a 5.41 ERA. He had been playing for Kansas City. He had been a very good, strong starter. And then somehow he ended up with Toronto. We got him from Toronto. I was very excited when we got Al Fitzmorris because he had been such a good player. But these pitchers, their arms wear out, and you never know when they're gonna be done. When they'll have a dead arm and they really can't pitch anymore because it's just too hard. They've just hurt. The arm can't do it anymore, and he was done, I believe. Yeah, so he had a disappointing year. Another guy, Larry Anderson, was 0-1 in 11 games. Don't remember him very well. Tom Buskey had no one-loss record, 0-0 with a 5.29 ERA in 21 games. So that's not too good. That's probably why we traded him. Although later he had some very good years with Toronto. Cardell Camper. What a name, was 1-0 with a 3.86 ERA in 3 games. And Pat Dobson was a guy that I really liked, and because he gave us a good year. He was 3-12 with a 6.14 ERA. So this was pretty much the end of the line for Pat Dobson. And I remember that year. I really liked him, one of my favorite players, and when he was struggling, he wasn't doing well, and it seemed like every start, it was like, oh my God, this might be. He really needed a good start, And it got down to the point of like every batter he faced, I thought, oh, he's got to get this guy out, or his career could have been over, and I believe it was. Because if you go 3-12 with a 6.14 ERA, you're not going to stay in baseball very long. But they kept putting him out there because he had a very long, fine career. Don Hood was 2-1 with a 3.00 ERA in 5 games. He didn't play very much. Jim Kern, again, a tremendous relief pitcher, was 8-10. He got all these wins and losses, even though he wasn't a starting pitcher, which is very unusual. 3.42 ERA and 18 saves. And then one of my favorite all-time players, Dave LaRoche, was 2-2 with a 5.30 with a 2-0 with 4 saves and 5.30 ERA, not too good. And then he got traded on May 11th, my 17th birthday. I felt real bad. And he went to the Angels in the Bruce Bhakti deal. And I found out years later that the Indians, it wasn't public, they received $250,000 in that trade. And they needed the money because they couldn't make payroll. And that's partly why they traded him to the Angels. And see, they laid out a lot of money for Wayne Garland, and we're hoping he'd do well, and that the Indians, the year before, they were over 500. They thought, if we get Garland, we're going to be much better, and then we'll get a lot of fans. There'll be a lot of income, but that did not happen because, as I said, Garland got hurt and then didn't do very well. In the Dave LaRoche deal, we picked up Sid Manji, who was 1-2 with a 6.23 ERA and 3 saves. That's pretty bad. Although actually Manji had quite a few very good years for Cleveland. Although certainly not the beginning wasn't too good. So it was a very tough year for the Indians. 1977. For this talk, I used the Cleveland Indians Encyclopedia by Russell Schneider, 2001. I used my memory, and then Russell Schneider was the tremendous Indians reporter writer for the Cleveland Plain Dealer. He would write about the games and he would write columns. He died last year. God bless Russell Schneider. So anyway, I used his book it's a wonderful book. It just has so much information, complete history of the team up until 2001, and it has the statistics, and actually every year it's just statistics and recap of the year. So anyway, the 1977 Tribe, God bless those fellows who played for Cleveland and gave it their best shot. They were our guys. God bless all the fans who rooted for the Indians in 1977. So good luck to the 2018 Cleveland Indians. Tribe rules, Cleveland City of Champions. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.